Alright, I am back with another video, and today we've got something a little bit different. Now, don't get me wrong, everyone here loves the companions and origin characters of Baldur's Gate 3, but most of the community agrees that there is a slight issue with the cast, and that's the diversity. Not in the usual sense, but in the fact that pretty much all of the characters are either humans or elves of some variety, with Karlach being the exception, and there's even a bunch of repeat classes, and sometimes even subclasses depending on how you build them. We've got multiple druids, and again, most of the party is an elf of some kind, which is a bit of a shame when there are so many other racial choices in the game, such as dwarfs, orcs, halflings, basically all of the kind of non-standard, like non-human-like races, shall we say. And that got me thinking, what if there was a companion or an origin character that was one of the other races, that also filled up a unused class slot, shall we say, a class that does not belong to any of the other playable characters? And for the longest time, I've always wanted to make a dwarf monk, because I think that could be a really interesting addition to the cast of Baldur's Gate 3. But none of the monk subclasses that we had at the time really sat right with me. They never really kind of fit the fantasy of what I had in mind for this potential companion. So, when patch 8 came out and we got Drunken Master Monk, well, I think it kind of speaks for itself. Today we are going to be making the companion that never was, the Drunken Master Monk Dwarf. But there are a few rules to how this kind of build was laid out, so let's talk about it. First up, no backgrounds could be repeated from the existing origin and companion characters. We had to use a background that had not already been taken up, as to help kind of, add some creative limitation to the build creation. Second of all, obviously, had to be a class that was not already taken up by a character, which basically left us with Monk or Bard, and since I personally consider Tav to be a Bard, basically just left me with only Monk, which obviously makes sense for this. Obviously, we're using a racial choice that has not already been selected for the companions or origin characters, and finally, I have to tie this character's lore into an existing quest in the game, because obviously all of the companions in this game have specific quests that are related to them. Astarion and Cazador, Shadowheart and the Temple of Shar, Karlach and Gortash, etc. So I wanted to tie this character's backstory into something related to at least a sizable part of the game, a big quest. So, we have got today the Drunken Sailor, a member of Captain Brisby's crew, a crew of pirates that, sail the seas around Baldur's Gate, pillaging and doing whatever, but also come back to Baldur's Gate and have a drink at the Blushing Mermaid, right? Standard stuff. Typical Drunken Sailor archetype with the dwarfish mix thrown on top. But this, of course, then ties this character into Auntie Ethel's questline, one of the bigger questlines in the game. Now imagine this. This guy has come back to Baldur's Gate after, a big day of pirating or whatever, and he is having a drink with his crew at the Blushing Mermaid, but then here's the commotion being caused by the Nautiloid outside. Goes to look, being the only one who's able to hold enough of a drink to be able to not be in a complete stupor and is actually able to walk outside, which then he gets sucked up by the Nautiloid. He ends up on the Nautiloid with the rest of the gang and is one of the characters you will find early on. As such, he lies to you, tells you that he's a typical sailor from Baldur's Gate and needs to get back to his crew in order to, keep up his job and, keeps providing for maybe his family or something like that. This, of course, is all a lie, but he's not going to tell you that he's a pirate right off the bat. Now, obviously, because this guy is a drunken master monk, he is going to have a severe drinking problem, meaning that, in a similar fashion to gale and magic items, you are going to need to supply him with various drinks in order to, keep him going, otherwise he's going to start sobering up and start having some negative effects on his personality. So basically, the more drunk you keep him, the happier he is, but obviously that creates a character dynamic which is obviously problematic, which means maybe later on in the game, perhaps around the time you discover the Open Hand Temple, you could get him to kind of, go into sobriety, becoming an Open Hand Monk instead, something like that. So there's a lot of room to play around. And obviously, if you do the Auntie Ethel questline, when you reach Act 3 and finally return to your crew, you find them to be under Auntie Ethel's control, which means it's your mission to save them so that our monk here can protect his crew and go back to his normal life once the Absolute is dealt with. And there you go! That is basically a potential idea for a brand new companion. They've got a connection to the storyline, there's potential for character growth, and yeah, then there's an air of mystery to them, and there is that act of deception at the start, which will eventually be unraveled as the story goes on. It kind of follows a lot of the same story beats as some of the other characters, and I think there is an interesting opportunity for this character to exist. Now, obviously for this, in the case of the channel's usual motto, we're doing a lot of roleplay here. Motto? Mantra, that's kind of what I mean. You get the point. Basically, you're kind of role-playing this out, especially if you do decide to play this as a quote-unquote origin character, basically your Tav. But otherwise, I do think it can be really interesting. Could also be interesting for a Dark Road Redemption playthrough, but that's just me. But I feel like if I had the ability and the power and the knowledge to maybe somehow mod this character into the game as an actual companion, I'd absolutely love to. But then this comes to question, how do you even have this character in your party? Well, first off, it doesn't need to be this exact monk that I've designed here. You could hire the Gold Dwarf hireling character and use them instead. Basically the exact same concept, just looks slightly different but plays the exact same. But there is a mod available on console as well, called Custom Hirelings, or full companion customization, where you just get to make basically extra Tavs to act as companions, in the same way to the hireling thing, and it is available on all platforms, so you can either make the character that I have shown here, or modify the hireling that you can already hire in the vanilla game to your liking. So yeah, that's how this theoretical extra companion that fits the bill that kind of wasn't there in the vanilla game, right off the bat. Again, requires a lot of roleplay, but I liked the concept, and I didn't really want to apply Drunken Master Monk to any of the other guys. The closest I could think I could put it to would be Minsk, but I see him more as a fully leveled giant barbarian, and I'll have a video prepared for him in the future. But for now, let's explore this potential new companion with the build. Let's get into it. Of course, we're going to be kicking things off as a monk. Same as kind of my origin and companion builds, I like to start the builds off with their original class, if I can. And for now, I've succeeded. So we're going to continue that here. With Monk, we're going to get Flurry of Blows at level 1, as well as Unarmored Defense, Dexterity attacks, allowing us to use our Dexterity instead of our Strength. Which this build will kind of have two modes that I'll explain as we get into, whether or not we want to use Strength or Dexterity. We also have Death Strikes, making our unarmed strikes a bit stronger, as well as the ability to make a bonus action unarmed strike if we need to after making a regular unarmed strike, which is pretty nice. So yeah, I didn't accidentally forget to talk about the abilities and skill proficiencies. No, I didn't. You saw nothing. That wasn't a weird edit in any way. But anyways, as for our ability scores, we've got a pretty standard monk spread here with something a little bit different. Dexterity is at 16 because we are going to need it to be our main attacking modifier if we decide to make this a dexterity-based build. Again, more on that in a minute. As well as Constitution is at 15 because you're going to have two options to bump this up with a half feat later. Intelligence is going to be at 8, we don't really need it as much as I don't really want to dump it. Wisdom is at 16 because obviously that is going to help our monk abilities as well as our spellcasting ability modifier, which we will need for some of our feats, as well as our unarmored defense. And charisma is at 10. I wanted a little bit, but not too much, because I'll be honest, when we're drunk, we have a disadvantage on dexterity and charisma checks, so yeah, we're not really going to be using charisma that much, because we do intend to stay drunk as much as possible with this build. Now, here's the thing, though. Strength. Obviously, we are making a drunken master monk who is about drinking at taverns and being a pirate, right? So it kind of makes sense to have Tavern Brawler on this build. No lie, it fits not only mechanically, but also lore-wise. Being a literal Tavern Brawler and starting fights is something that a rough and rowdy pirate character would actually do. So here's where we're going to discuss how Tavern Brawler is going to work on this build. Basically, in the kind of way of tying the lore of the character into an actual game mechanic, we're not just going to be providing this guy with regular alcoholic drinks, we need something a lot stronger. And by stronger, I mean giant stronger. Yes, I know this is my second build in a row where I've done this, but I do actually think this kind of side quest of constantly keeping this character fueled up with hill giant strength potions to make him stronger is actually an interesting mechanical lore tie-in, right? Like, you can kind of reflavor it as him being almost like a messed up version of Popeye, where he has to drink his alcohol in order to get his full strength, which, in this case, would apply Tavern Brawler. Now, in this build, I'm going to be showing what I think is the strongest variation of the character, which is the strength-based version using these elixirs. The stats are the exact same, it's just whether you use the giant elixirs or not. But especially if you do end up going down the route of him eventually becoming sober and maybe becoming an open hand monk, we can play more of a dexterity based version where we don't need to rely on those elixirs. But of course, this dexterity based version still exists if you don't want to play that reliant on elixir strategy. So the strength version of this build is the one that I am showing off today. But it is not the only way to play this build. You can play this more as a standard dexterity-based monk, and you're honestly not going to lose much. You're still going to have all the fun, thematic, and mechanical sense of playing this character. You're just not going to be as strong as you could be, and you're not going to be using the Tavern Brawler feat, which again, for a build literally called the Drunken Sailor, I kind of feel like we need Tavern Brawler. I'm just saying. But anyways, that is the skill spread so far. Let's have a look at the skill proficiencies. Pretty simple stat spread here. I went with the Entertainer background. Now, the Entertainer background is not taken up by any of the others. Really, I wanted a background that was kind of more based in cooking, so maybe Guild Artisan could have been something like that. But I felt like Entertainer, you know, this guy is the life of the party, you know, he gets a bit drunk and he's able to show off. Drunken Master Monks do get performance proficiency, though, so if you wanted to swap this out for something else, you could. But I felt like Entertainer was the closest thing that I wanted because it gives us the acrobatics thing, and I kind of felt like that was great. And obviously I couldn't take Outlander as well because obviously that's taken up by Karlach, so Entertainer was kind of a happy middle ground for me, but feel free to tell me what else you would have picked in the description in the comments below. But of course we get acrobatics proficiency from this, which I wanted, performance, which we would have gotten from Drunken Master Monk anyway, but it's whatever. Again, feel free to change this up. And I decided to go with insight and athletics for our other proficiencies. So yeah, that is level 1. At level 2, we're going to get the standard monk stuff, a bit of an increase to our movement speed, which is nice because we do have short, stubby legs, so this does help us get up to full speed, literally. But anyways, now we also get patient defense, allowing us to apply disadvantage to attack rolls against us, and advantage on dexterity saving throws. This can offset the penalty from being drunk, because obviously, like I said, drunk means that we have disadvantage on dex saves, so this is a happy medium for us. We're also going to be able to grab Step of the Wind, Dash, and Disengage. Not going to really end up using these too much on this build, but they're nice to have. At Monk level 3, we get to choose our subclass, and of course we are going with Way of the Drunken Master. Where the Drunken Master allows us to, with the unpredictable lurches of a tippler, you hiccup your way through battle, frustrating foes with carefully executed movements concealed beneath a facade of incompetence. Now obviously normally a Drunken Master Monk is not literally drunk, they're just fighting in a way that is mimicking the Drunken Masters that you see, like, you know, from old martial arts movies and stuff, which is very, very cool, but I did want to take it slightly more literally here. But I also do like the idea of this character being this, like, you know, rough and tumble pirate type, but he has a genuine layer of skill underneath what he does. And I genuinely think that could be a fun little way of, again, adding some nuance and depth to the character. Like, actually, despite his flaws, this guy knows what he's doing. He is one tough cookie. I don't know, I feel like it kind of adds into the kind of like monkish flavor that this character can have lying beneath the surface. Maybe he just picked up a ton of fighting experience through his many years as a pirate. I will also point out, because I kind of forgot to mention it at level 1, that we are playing a gold dwarf, which was a deliberate choice, because the idea of gold dwarfs having a higher constitution because they just naturally get more HP kind of feels like it fits the fact that this guy can drink most people under the table. Weird side note, but I figured bringing it up here is fine. Moving on, like I say, we do get proficiency and performance here, so if you take a different background, you're still going to get performance, which is nice. You're also going to get Cheeky Tipple. You are immune to the negative effects of being drunk. Never mind, I'm an idiot, I completely missed this when I originally read the passive, so yeah, you don't have disadvantage on dexterity and charisma, which is nice. But you are going to be able to, also once per day, when you drink alcohol, you regain half your key points rounded down. So yep, drink, and drink some more. It's definitely going to be worth it. How on earth did I miss that when I first read this passive? Oh, I need to not theorycraft builds late at night. Anyways, moving on. We also get Drunken Technique. Punch twice in quick succession to grant yourself an additional 3 meters of movement and the benefits of disengage. This is why we don't need to use Step of the Wind so much. With our increased movement speed from being a monk in general, plus the ability to disengage just from basically doing our flurry of blows, this is a nice little feature to just get us out of potentially dicey situations. And I did use it quite a bit in my testing. Honestly, a lot of people I think are kind of like underestimating this ability. It has a lot of really, really good synergy with a lot of different things, and again, just that added benefit of being able to do damage and then get out to defend yourself, it's nice. It's really nice. I could see some weird spear-based Polar Master build using this, and I think that is going to be a build in the future. At Monk level 4, we're going to get some extra stuff that we wouldn't normally get. First up, Life of the Party. Every time Intoxicating Strike hits, the monk gains Life of the Party, which increases their armor class and attack rolls against drunk targets. Life of the Party will give us a +1 bonus to our armor class and a plus wisdom modifier, so our wisdom modifier is added to our attack rolls against drunk targets, so we're much more likely to hit. But how are we getting our targets drunk? With Intoxicating Strike, hitting a creature with our bare fists as an action or a bonus action to potentially get them drunk. And obviously the drunk condition, as I said, makes the target have disadvantage on dex and charisma checks. Not saving throws, checks. My apologies. But anyways, moving on, we get to choose our first feat of the build. Now, this is where your build path is going to kind of diverge. As I said, if you're okay with going with the mechanical flavor of using the potions of Hill Giant Strength to give this guy his full power, then you're going to want to take Tavern Brawler here, which is what I will be showing off. Tavern Brawler will allow us to bump up our Constitution to a 16, and whenever you make an unarmed attack, use an improvised weapon or throw something, your Strength modifier is added twice to the damage and attack rolls. This is obviously incredible. I feel like we're going to use unarmed strikes and improvised weapons quite a lot on this build. Not throwing so much, but obviously that option is there, and obviously adding that twice to the attack and damage rolls is just going to make us incredibly powerful, and obviously being able to bump up our Constitution is great. So if you're using those elixirs, you're definitely going to want to take this here. However, if you're not, I would probably go for a bump to either your Dexterity or your Wisdom, whichever is more important to you at the time. Probably your Wisdom, because my early game equipment recommendation is the Graceful Cloth, which means that you're going to be able to have 18 Dexterity at this point anyway, so really it's up to you, but overall kind of pick your poison here. I will say, however, though, later on in the build, if you do go down the Dexterity route, take the Durable feat instead, increasing your Constitution by 1 and giving you the ability to regain full hit points each time you take a short rest. This is kind of a lore or flavor pick, but it does feel like it makes a ton of sense for the build. I don't know why, but it just feels right. There's also the Lucky feat instead, or Resilient Constitution, if you want another thing that can bump up your Constitution. You've got a few options here, but I think Durable or Tavern Brawler are obviously the best options, and for now, we're going with Tavern Brawler. At Monk level 5, we're going to get extra attack, which is great, as well as Stunning Strike, which obviously we already know about. Stunning a target is potentially extremely strong, so we're happy to have that here. At Monk level 6, we're going to gain access to Key Empowered Strikes, allowing us to overcome that pesky bludgeoning damage resistance to be able to attack things with our full power. But we're also going to get some pretty damn cool stuff. We're going to gain access to Leap to your feet whenever we are prone. Standing up only uses 1.5 meters of our movement speed. It's not half of our movement speed, it's just this small fixed amount. And with our increased unarmored movement, that's barely anything. So being prone is nowhere near as much of a problem as it needs to be. But that's not the best feature. We're looking at Redirect Attack, which is the best feature. Whenever a creature misses you with a melee attack, you can spend 1 key point as a reaction to use Unarmed Strike back at them. So now not only can we deflect missiles, we can also deflect attacks. This ability is so cool and so flavorful that they made it a base monk feature in D&D 2024, so you know it's good. At level 7, we're going to get Evasion, allowing us to, whenever we would take full damage on a successful on a Dexterity saving throw, I should say, we only take half damage if we fail and no damage if we succeed. Brilliant. We're also going to get Stillness of Mind, preventing us from being charmed or frightened. Again, with the lore that we have for this character, I like this feature that maybe he was able to resist Auntie Ethel's influence when it came to, you know, how she took over his crew and maybe how that would have maybe affected him mentally when he found that out in Act 3. This just prevents him from being charmed or frightened, which I think would work. At Monk level 8, we're going to grab another feat, and at this point, again, if you're playing the strength-based variant, I'd take an ability score improvement and bump up our wisdom. If you already bumped up your wisdom, you can either take durable here or bump up your dexterity, your choice. At Monk level 9, we get to go for advanced unarmored movement, meaning the difficult terrain no longer slows us down, and you can jump an additional 6 meters if you're not wearing armor or using a shield. Obviously, this is great. We now have way more maneuverability. Combine this with potentially high strength, and we could be leaping across buildings. It's going to be amazing. We also get Sobering Realization, and I think this is where Drunken Master Monk loses some people. You hit a drunk target to sober them up by dealing bonus psychic damage. On a successful hit, the monk loses their Life of the Party feature, which is that extra bit of armor class and attack roll chance, which I can see why people don't like this feature. Shadow Monk gets Psychic Strike at level 11, which is a much more powerful version of this. It doesn't come with the downside of losing a buff. So I would say if you're planning to multi-class with this build, now might be the time to do it. Now, I am not multi-classing with this build, because I actually wanted to get 3 feats here, and I wanted most of the monk abilities. So I kind of decided to try and I looked at the other multi-classing options, but the way the stats are laid out in this build, without maybe taking another stat-boosting item like the gloves of dexterity, there wasn't another way I could really work in any multi-classes here. But let me tell you some interesting potential multi-classes I would recommend if you do decide to pick up something like the gloves of dexterity. First up, Barbarian. Obviously, this will allow us to get a version of an armored defense that uses our Constitution. Maybe you want to make this a more Constitution-focused build, this could work. And obviously, Giant Barbarian would be a lot of fun here. Berserker Barbarian, Wildheart Barbarian, choose your favourite. There's also Rogue for Swashbuckler Rogue, if you're willing to put in some points into Charisma. You could use things like Pocket Sand or Vicious Mockery as a bonus action, which could be very fun. Similarly so, Bard, Law Bard specifically in this case, or Swords Bard if you want to be more of a scimitar-wielding pirate. Obviously you'd get things like Vicious Mockery and the ability to insult people more with Law Bard, but I didn't see this build as really a magic caster. In fact, I decided to keep magic away from this build pretty much in its entirety, for kind of like just flavor reasons, which is why I didn't really want to go with it here. The only other thing I could possibly recommend would probably be Druid, if you want to go for like, I almost wanted to go for almost like this guy is the party's cook type of angle, in which he's really good at making food and such like that, so Goodberry could be a fun choice there, so you could get that from Druid or Ranger. I don't know. There's a lot of interesting multi-classing choices I would say you could make post-Monk level 8, so please feel free to play around with the various concepts here, play around with the equipment, and decide what you think would work best. But for now, we're going straight Monk, so we're going to grab Sobering Realization, which I don't think is as big of a debuff in quotations as people think it actually is, but extra psychic damage does go a long way, and you do get it sooner for more multi-classing potential. At Monk level 10, we're going to get even more unarmored movement, as well as purity of body, which I think really fits this build thematically. Gold Dwarfs already get poison resistance, which is part of the reason why they can drink so much, so becoming so much of a kind of drunken master that you're actually immune to poison damage outright, and even disease? Like, that's kind of cool. So, and again, you can even treat this as kind of a fun flavor feature. Again, if you go down the sobering route where he becomes maybe an open hand monk, you can see that this immunity to poison is him swearing off of alcohol to the point where it no longer affects him. Like, he's just gone through that much mental discipline. Physical discipline, even. Like, I don't know. When late game abilities kind of can reflect a character arc, it feels pretty cool. Moving on, we now get another kind of unique feature here, Drunkard's Luck. Whenever we make an ability check, attack roll, or saving throw and have disadvantage on the roll, you can spend 2 key points to negate that disadvantage. This is... it's good. It's not worth going to level 11 all the time for, but it is pretty good. I like the ability to basically give yourself a second chance on some of these rolls. It's kind of nice, but overall, I feel like if I'm going to make builds with this in the future, it's not really a feature I'm going to be gunning for, so to speak. And finally, at Monk level 12, we're going to gain access to our final feat of the build, and at this point, you have a choice. I would say if you're playing with Dexterity-based version of this build, max out your Dexterity here. You should have about a 20 in Dexterity and an 18 in Wisdom. But because we're playing the Strength version of this build, and I want to lean more into the Dwarvish Constitution angle, we're going to bump up our Constitution to an 18. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a pretty damn strong character. Again, we're a Tavern Brawler monk focused on using strength. We're going to be pretty goddamn strong, as you can see there. I'll get more to that in a minute. But we also have a ton of interesting ways to influence combat. Being able to make targets drunk, giving them disadvantage on certain checks, those dexterity checks kind of helping out there a bit. And also just being a general powerhouse, like... overall, it's pretty fun. Being able to make targets drunk is just so hilarious. We've got powerful unarmed strikes. We've got our drunken technique to help us disengage. We've got patient defense, sobering realization to deal the not often resisted psychic damage, which is always nice to have, and even stunning strike. Overall, again, you're playing a pretty standard monk, but the fun lies in the flavor. Like I say, this is a theoretical what if, like again, the companion that never actually existed. Honestly, again, if I was better with the modding tools and knew how to do, like, actual voice acting and such like that, I'd love to put this as a full companion into the game, but, you know, it's whatever. Again, the basic monk kit, pretty simple, but obviously, again, with most of my builds, a lot of the fun comes from the equipment choices and how we implement them into the character. So, let's take a look at that now. Now, obvious choices out of the way, let's talk about it. the drunk equipment. I don't think they're that great on this build, with the exception of one, but I will talk about them right off the bat just to get that kind of notion out of the way. First up, the Punch Drunk Bastard. While you are drunk, you have advantage on attack rolls. You also create a blast with each attack, dealing 1d4 thunder damage for 3 meters. Obviously, this is kind of a cool feature. Gaining advantage on all attack rolls while you're drunk is pretty nice. However, this is a two-handed weapon, meaning that A, it can't be a monk weapon, so it does not work with the dexterity version of this build, and B, that thunder damage can hit our allies, which sucks. So you have to run this with the strength variant of this build if you want to run it, but obviously it is worth running. It's a pretty powerful weapon with a unique effect, comes with tenacity as well. It's only a +1 weapon at base, so maybe the Drakethroat Clave would be required to give this the bump it really needs with an extra bit of thunder damage on top. But overall, I can see why people would want to use this, but I personally prefer keeping to unarmed strikes a bit more, but I thought I would bring it up because I knew someone else would. But now, the next part of the Drunken equipment, since actually all of the Drunken equipment actually works now, it didn't for the longest time, is the Drunken Cloth that can be obtained in Act 3. While drunk, you have advantage on con saves, which is pretty damn good, and you gain temporary hit points equal to your Constitution modifier at the start of the turn. Overall, for this build, the Constitution saving throws aren't a huge deal. The temporary hit points, though, is very nice. What I do see this being great on is that Bard build that I was talking about earlier, keeping up your powerful concentration spells. So maybe there is some sort of drunken wizard, drunken druid build in the future. I don't know. There's definitely stuff to play around with the drunken master stuff, especially since you can negate that drunk penalty just by taking the subclass, which, of course, I totally knew from the start. There's going to be a disclaimer at the start of this video because I got some stuff wrong. Anyways, also the final piece of the Drunken equipment, which I consider to be the best one, is the Amulet of the Drunken. While wearing this amulet, you regain 2 to 8 hit points per turn while drunk, and that inebriation is increased by 5 rounds. This is obviously amazing. This combined with the temporary HP actually can be pretty good for tanking, making this build a lot stronger than it otherwise would be, and is again kind of why I wanted to lean into Constitution a bit more. Obviously we have more equipment that we could talk about here, but obviously I did want to talk about the obvious 3 pieces of equipment, because of course I was going to use them here. I'm not that original. So yeah, overall pretty solid choices. Now, let's talk about the rest of the build. Now, I will point out the Diadem of Arcane Synergy. This is an older save file I actually made to take this off. But I originally played with the Diadem of Arcane Synergy, and I've tested this so you don't have to see if the drunk effect that we apply to our enemies gives us Arcane Synergy. Believe it or not, it does. It does count as inflicting a condition, so we can get Arcane Synergy with this build. Unfortunately though, Arcane Synergy does not work with unarmed strikes. It would work, however, with the Punch Drunk Bastard. So if you're running the Punch Drunk Bastard on this build, you can wear the Diadem of Arcane Synergy and get that effect using your Wisdom, which I actually think is a bit of, well, fun synergy. Pun intended, I guess. So, unless you're running the Unarmed Strike variant, which I am, you don't need this, but it is a thing that you can make use of. But otherwise, grab the Scrappy Pugilist Circuit, giving you an additional bit of damage on your weapon and unarmed strikes while surrounded by 2 or more foes. Now, you're going to notice a theme with this. Obviously, we could have gone for the Horns of the Berserker instead, which would have given us necrotic damage less restrictively. But again, I wanted to stick to pure physical damage. No magic damage to be found here other than sobering realization. So I decided to take the option that's going to give us more physical damage. And again, that's going to be a running theme with the rest of the equipment. So for the early game, grab the Haste Helm, giving you momentum at the start of your turn for 3 turns, which again is going to help you even more with that stubby leg movement speed. This is just a pretty generic choice that works great for the early game to give you that extra bit of a bump. Moving on to the Cloak, we have none, but feel free to slap on anything you like. The Cloak of Protection obviously would work here, since our AC is slightly on the lower side. Moving on to our main equipment, obviously we already spoke about the Drunken Cloth, but your early game option can be the Graceful Cloth, giving you a +2 to Dexterity, which can help you out with your early game stat spread, as well as giving you a +1 bonus to Dex saves and increasing your jump distance by 1.5 meters. Obviously, pretty useful. If you don't care for the Drunken Cloth in the late game, just keep this and give yourself a higher AC overall, and advantage on those Dexterity scores from those Dexterity checks, I should say, from Cat's Grace is quite nice. Moving on to the gloves, you have 2 choices depending on the playstyle you want to go for. First up is the Gloves of Uninhibited Kashigo, giving you an additional 1d4 damage with throw attacks and attacks made of improvised weapons. If you want to be that true Tavern Brawler who's smashing glasses and mugs over people's heads, hitting them with chairs and slamming them into tables, this is more the gloves for you. And honestly, I kind of like that flavour, so it's my personal choice. But if you want more just pure unarmed damage, if you just want to focus on punching, go for the Gloves of Crushing, giving you a +1 bonus to unarmed attack rolls, and all of your unarmed attacks will deal a flat additional 2 bludgeoning damage, which is obviously very good, because that's even more damage down here, which is great with Tavern Brawler, as we said. Moving on to the Boots option, you have the Boots of Uninhibited Kashigo. The wearer deals additional damage equal to their Wisdom modifier with unarmed strikes. Obviously, if this is just a free power boost, no reason not to take this in the late game. Of course, though, in the early game, you do have the Acrobat Shoes, which I decided to take to give us a bonus to acrobatics, because again, I kind of like the idea of this build being good at acrobatics. I picture this build, again, when it's on the high seas, swinging across the ropes from the masts, or just, you know, having really good sea legs and not being caught off balance. Now, obviously, the advantage on dexterity saving throw checks is actually quite nice, because, like I say, before you get the Drunken Master feature in the early game, this will offset that penalty, although you will get that pretty quick. As well as the fact that this can help if you don't want to be spending key points on patient defense to get that bonus, which obviously can synergize well with evasion. So in the early to mid game, this is quite good, but obviously in the late game, you're going to want to grab the boots. I totally didn't have these before I remembered that, you know, before I realized that, you know, you negate the effects of drunk. Whoops. Now, for the accessories, I already talked about the Amulet of the Drunkard, but here we have a couple of rings. First up, the Emerald Ring, which is actually Crusher's Ring in the main game. Don't know why it's called that here, probably mod shenanigans. We get a +3 bonus to our movement speed. Is pretty damn good overall, but again, if I wasn't sticking to the only physical damage thing, I would be throwing on the ring that gives you extra radiant damage on illuminated targets, because that applies to all of our punches, so that could be free extra damage if you want it, but I decided to include this here because I want our boy to be quite fast. But the main ring we have here is the Shadow Cloaked Ring. The wearer's weapon and unarmed attacks deal an additional 1d4 damage against light or heavily obscured creatures and creatures made of shadow. So just for standing in the shade, our punches deal an additional 1d4 damage, which is nice. And again, it's physical damage, so that works. However, I do want to point out another ring. Now again, I'm not using mods in my builds yet. I've decided to leave them behind for patch 8 for a while and just focus on the vanilla content. However, if you're on console or PC, you do have the ability to gain access to unimplemented items. This isn't necessarily items that have been modded into the game in the traditional sense, but really just cut content that never made it to the final game in some shape or form. And there is one piece of cut content that I have to recommend for this build if you don't mind using mods to get it in some shape or form. That is the Hag's Ring. For obvious reasons, it's tied into Auntie Ethel's questline, as it says by the description. And of course, that means it can tie into this character's, overall character arc as well. But it also gives us Vicious Mockery as a cantrip at will. That can scale off of our Wisdom modifier. I mean, that feels like it fits this build pretty goddamn well. So I would highly recommend the Hag's Ring if you decide to go down that route. But yes, that is the build, and I apologise that I did make a couple of mistakes when it came to how certain features worked, but obviously as I've recorded this video, I've realised. But again, sometimes I do a lot of my build theory crafting and testing rather late at night, and sometimes I do miss things, and I apologise for that. Again, there'll be a disclaimer at the start of the video just saying, hey, I do get a couple of things wrong, but before you comment, just watch the video, because I do realise it, and I do readjust. But really, it changes nothing about the build. I still recommend all of the equipment the exact same way, because it's all basically, it comes out the same in the wash, but we just get a few extra benefits that I didn't realise, which is kind of nice. That immunity to being drunk is absolutely great. And obviously, again, I feel like this is an interesting concept for a potential companion. Like, again, it covers a racial option that wasn't used, it covers the only class that wasn't taken up by somebody, because again, personally, I think Tav is a bard, just from the little bit of information that we have about their backstory. And, you know, I just think it works together really, really nicely. I think, like, the theming's there, it ties into a side quest that's a major part of the game across multiple acts, so it feels like it could be a companion quest. Again, if I had the ability and all the tools in the world and time and knowledge and expertise, you know, to actually mod this companion into the game as someone who has their own little, you know, bits of dialogue and such like that, I absolutely would, because I think it would be a hell of a fun time. But again, this is actually kind of an interesting build that could be accessible to all, and if you've played a bunch of Baldur's Gate 3 runs and you're looking for a new type of companion, then here you go. Someone you certainly haven't used yet, because well, they've only existed now. Maybe I could do more of these companions that never were builds in the future, but of course we don't really have, any more classes that I could pick from. I guess Bard technically, so if you want me to come up with a theoretical Bard companion, let me know, although we do already kind of have Alfira. And I technically made an Alfira build, just not the one you might be expecting. But it's an older video, but it checks out, so feel free to go give that a watch. But anyways, I think that's going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.